On a quiet Tuesday morning along South Africa's rugged Tsitsikamma coastline, 29-year-old field ecologist Elena was immersed in her work, carefully documenting the vibrant intertidal marine life that thrived in the tidal pools scattered across the rocks. The air was fresh, tinged with the salty scent of the ocean, and the rhythmic crashing of waves provided a familiar, soothing soundtrack to her day. But then, out of the usual symphony of seabird calls and rolling surf, Elena heard a sound that stopped her in her tracks. It wasn't the distant cry of gulls or the whisper of the wind. It was sharp, desperate, a high-pitched meow, fractured and trembling with panic. The cry echoed again, louder this time, cutting through the coastal breeze and seeming to come from somewhere high above. Elena's heart sank instantly. She scanned the jagged cliffs with mounting dread, and without hesitation, began climbing. The sun-warmed rocks scraped against her hands, raw and gritty, and her lungs burned as she pushed herself upward with urgency. After what felt like an eternity, she reached a narrow ledge about 30 feet above the roaring surf. There, clinging precariously to the very edge of the cliff, was a small gray and white domestic short-hair cat. Its paws trembled violently, claws desperately scraping the crumbling stone, and its wide eyes were filled with raw terror. How the cat had ended up stranded on this unstable ledge was a mystery. Elena suspected it had likely chased a gull or a small rodent too far along the narrow cliff face, only for the fragile rock beneath to give way beneath its paws, leaving it stranded and terrified, trapped far from safety. The thought of the helpless animal, alone and vulnerable in such a dangerous place, steeled Elena's resolve. "Hey, hey, little one," Elena whispered, her voice barely rising above the crash of distant waves and the sharp coastal wind. She lowered herself with deliberate care onto a stable patch of sun-warmed rock, positioning herself just above the narrow ledge where the cat clung, frozen in sheer terror. The moment their eyes met, something in Elena's chest clenched. The cat's gaze was wide and wild, a haunting mix of fear, fatigue, and the silent plea of an animal who knew it was close to the end. Its front paws were hooked desperately over a crumbling edge, shaking with the effort to hold on, while its hind legs flailed uselessly in midair. Its claws scratched helplessly at the cliff face, leaving faint, desperate marks in the stone. The meow that escaped its mouth was hoarse and broken, little more than a whisper, but it carried every ounce of panic imaginable. Elena fumbled for her phone and dialed the local SPCA wildlife unit, trying to keep her voice steady as she relayed the emergency. Her fingers were shaking. A cat, trapped on a cliff edge, about 30 feet up from the surf. She's slipping. The response was swift, but gutting. The nearest team was more than 3 hours away, already deployed to assist with a major bushfire evacuation inland. "She won't last that long," Elena muttered, her voice barely audible as she looked back at the fragile animal, barely holding on. A tiny fragment of rock gave way beneath one of the cat's paws and tumbled silently into the waves below, a grim warning of what could come next. She scanned her surroundings. No rope, no climbing tools, no cage, tranquilizer, or even gloves. Just her worn field backpack, a lightweight jacket, and a leather belt cinched loosely at her waist. But Elena had something that couldn't be packed in gear. Grit. A stubborn, aching sense of responsibility, and a voice in her gut that said, "You are her only chance." She glanced back down at the cat, whose eyes never left hers. There was terror there, yes, but also trust, or at least a willingness to hope. Elena's heart pounded. "I'm not leaving you," she said quietly, determination rising in her throat like a wave. She wasn't sure how yet, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was going to try. With a deep breath to steady her nerves, Elena peeled off her windbreaker, the morning chill brushing against her skin. She then slipped off her belt and, with quick, practiced fingers, began threading it through the sleeves of her jacket, fashioning a crude, improvised harness. It wasn't much, far from ideal, but she hoped that distributing the cat's weight even slightly might be enough to ease the strain on its claws and keep it from slipping further. "Okay, sweetheart, we're going to do this together," Elena murmured softly, voice steady but full of quiet determination. Carefully, she lowered herself flat onto her stomach, pressing her body close to the rocky surface for stability. Inch by inch, she extended the makeshift harness toward the trembling feline, who still clung to the edge with all its might. Elena's voice was calm and soothing, a gentle stream of words meant to comfort both herself and the terrified animal. What happened next would etch itself into her memory forever. Instead of panicking or lashing out, the cat did something unexpected. It shifted its tiny body, ever so slightly, just enough to allow Elena to slip the loop of the harness around its chest and under the front legs. The trust it took to let a stranger so close in such a perilous moment stunned her. The entire process stretched on for nearly 20 agonizing minutes. Elena's arm burned fiercely from the strain of holding her own weight while keeping the harness steady. The sun warmed her back, the salty sea breeze tousled her hair, but her focus never wavered. The cat's cooperation felt almost uncanny, as if it somehow understood that Elena was there to help, not harm. With the belt finally snug around the cat's tiny frame, Elena braced herself. She gently pulled on the harness, applying steady, measured tension. "Now climb, girl," she whispered urgently. "Push with your legs. I've got you." Bit by bit, paw by trembling paw, the cat responded. It scrambled against the cliff face, clutching at any notch or crevice it could find. Elena pulled with care, coaxing and encouraging in soft whispers. At last, the small gray and white cat reached her hands. Relief flooded Elena's chest as she scooped the exhausted animal into her arms and collapsed backward onto the rocky ledge. Both of them trembled, Elena from adrenaline, the cat from sheer exhaustion. The feline was panting heavily, foam forming at the corners of its mouth. Elena cradled her tightly against her chest, feeling the faint but steady beat of life within those fragile ribs. "You're okay now?" "We did it," she murmured, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. Elena carefully carried the exhausted cat down the rugged cliff path, her steps slow and deliberate to avoid further injury. She wrapped the trembling animal in a dry towel from her kit, the soft fabric providing a fragile sense of security. The cat didn't resist or hiss. Instead, she curled tightly in Elena's lap, her eyes half closed, releasing faint, fragile purrs that seemed to speak of relief and trust. By the time the SPCA team finally arrived, weary and hurried from their extended emergency response, they were taken aback by what they saw. The feral-looking cat, clearly worn and fragile, was not only alive, but remarkably calm, and stubbornly refusing to leave Elena's side. It was as if the two had forged an unspoken pact in those perilous moments on the cliff. "This isn't normal behavior," said Dr. Peter Holman, the attending vet, shaking his head in disbelief. "Cats in this state are usually aggressive, terrified, or completely shut down. She's bonded to you, Elena. It's rare, but this bond can mean everything." The team quickly assessed the cat's condition, treating her for dehydration and minor scrapes sustained during the ordeal. When it was time to move her into a crate for transport, Tala erupted into loud yowls, her distress palpable, until Elena crouched nearby, her soothing presence quieting the cat immediately. After a thoughtful discussion, the team made an unusual but heartfelt request. Would Elena accompany Tala to the rehabilitation center? Without hesitation, she agreed. At the center, the bond between Elena and the cat deepened in ways she had never expected. Tala, as she was now named, refused to eat unless Elena was within arm's reach. Night after night, Tala would press her slender body against the edge of the enclosure closest to Elena's cot, vocalizing softly. Not out of fear, but almost as if in conversation. One night, Elena was awakened by a gentle rhythmic trill. In the pale moonlight, she saw Tala sitting silently by the fence, her eyes locked on Elena's with an intensity that felt almost human. As Elena approached, Tala pressed her nose against the wire mesh and let out a low, rumbling purr. Tentatively, Elena reached out, and Tala extended a delicate paw, touching Elena's fingertips through the barrier. "I hear you," Elena whispered, a quiet tremor in her voice. That moment lingered in the stillness, profound and unforgettable. It shook Elena more deeply than any wildlife encounter in her career. This was not simply about survival anymore. It was about connection, trust, and a fragile, beautiful bridge between two very different lives. 3 days later, the team gathered at the edge of the coastal forest where Tala had most likely lived before her perilous ordeal. The air was thick with salty breeze and the distant cries of seabirds, the same wildness that had framed their rescue. The moment had come to let Tala return to the life she was meant to lead. As they gently opened the crate, expecting Tala to bolt into the underbrush, she surprised them all. Instead, she stepped out slowly, pausing to look directly into Elena's eyes, a steady, unblinking gaze filled with quiet understanding. Without hesitation, Tala walked a few careful steps away, then stopped and turned back, as if silently asking Elena to follow. Elena rose and followed her onto the sandy beach where their harrowing journey had ended. Tala's pause disturbed the soft sand as she began to dig, the rhythm slow and purposeful. After a few moments, she uncovered something unexpected, a tiny scrap of fabric, torn from Elena's jacket during the climb. With gentle care, Tala picked up the scrap in her mouth and laid it delicately at Elena's feet. Elena's throat tightened and her eyes stung with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered softly, her voice barely audible over the crashing waves. "You remembered." The sun began to dip low, painting the horizon with hues of orange and pink. Tala padded quietly to the water's edge, her silhouette framed by the shimmering surf. She turned once more, letting out a soft, almost musical meow, then gazed out at the endless expanse of sea. Elena sat down beside her, the cool sand beneath them, both watching the waves roll in rhythmically. For several long, wordless minutes, they simply existed side by side, two souls bound by an extraordinary journey, sharing a moment of profound peace. Eventually, Tala rose and began to walk inland toward the dense brush. Every few yards, she paused and looked back, ensuring Elena was still there. At the crest of a dune, she stopped, her body still and composed. Then, with a final gentle meow, not a cry of distress but a soft farewell, Tala disappeared into the wild, a creature reclaimed by nature. Elena stayed seated for a long while, the weight of the goodbye settling deep inside her. Though the wild had taken Tala back, their bond remained, unbroken, unforgettable, and eternally etched in her heart. Several months had passed since that unforgettable day on the rugged Tsitsikamma coastline. Life had slowly returned to its usual rhythm for Elena, but the memory of Tala lingered, a quiet presence in the back of her mind. One late afternoon, driven by a longing she couldn't quite explain, Elena made her way back to the same beach where she had last seen the gray and white cat vanish into the wild. The salty breeze carried the familiar scent of ocean and pine, and the sky was streaked with the warm hues of an impending sunset. As she reached the edge of the coastal forest, her breath caught in her throat. There, partially hidden in the underbrush, was a sleek gray cat, poised and serene. Their eyes met, and in that frozen moment, neither flinched. Tala's gaze was calm, unwavering, filled with a silent recognition that seemed to transcend words. With the same graceful composure Elena remembered, Tala settled down, curling her tail neatly around her paws, her steady eyes never leaving Elena's face. "I remember you too," Elena whispered softly, a smile tugging at her lips, her heart full. That quiet reunion was more than just a chance encounter. The footage and stories from their bond, the daring cliffside rescue, the shared moments on the beach, and this unexpected return, would eventually become invaluable to researchers studying animal behavior. Their story offered unique insights into trauma, memory, and the deep emotional connections possible between humans and animals. Tala was never simply a stray cat stranded on a cliff. She was living proof that even the smallest creatures possess an extraordinary capacity for trust, gratitude, and love. Qualities that bind us all across the divide of species. And in that moment, beneath the fading light and the endless sky, Elena and Tala shared a connection that time could never erase. If this story touched your heart, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with fellow animal lovers, and leaving a comment below. Want more real-life stories of courage and connection? Subscribe to follow along, because sometimes the smallest rescues carry the biggest meanings.